So tonight we're going into a couple of new stories, not new to us, but new in terms of their positioning now in the book of John. We're going to talk about the man who was healed by the pool of Bethesda and the power of that statement. And then also we're going to talk about Jesus walking on the water, Jesus feeding the 5,000. Those are some of the unique stories in these two chapters. Now, I want to show you before we go forward a contrast to what we went through last week in chapter 4, where we talked about Jesus with the woman at the pool of Samaria in the countryside of Samaria in that region. Because the mindset, the attitude that is seen there is very different from the mindset we're going to see in chapter 5. Chapter 4 in Samaria, chapter 5, now he's heading back into Jerusalem. And you'll see that there's a very, very different reception, very different mindset and approach to Jesus between the two. And I believe, again, that John is sharing these things intentionally to try and form, if you will, an understanding of how these responses took place. In Samaria, he was very much received, very readily received. And he wasn't really, it didn't take a lot for people to accept him. He prophesied a little bit to the Samaritan woman, but in talking and speaking, there was something about him that they gravitated to and they believed. And here's one of the key words we see over and over again as you go through the book of John. They believed. Believing, believe is a key word here. And the question of whether you believe or don't believe. Someone was on a couple weeks ago that didn't really believe in the book of John and what these stories were perhaps saying, or that they had been rewritten or doctored, and questions about who Jesus was. This is the whole intent of the book, is to identify who Jesus is to the point where you can make the choice to believe. It's not a proof of it, but it does talk about how different people respond to what they saw and what they experienced in Jesus. In Samaria, they readily accepted Jesus. When Jesus came and spoke, and just seeing and hearing from him, man, they were excited about it. But when we get into Jerusalem, the response is very, very different. We'll see that in a minute. But I want to take you back real quick to the 4th chapter, because there's a paragraph here which I think is very relevant to what we're talking about. We talked about it a little bit, but I want to bring it back to this concept in John chapter 4, verse 21 through 24. This is when the woman is asking him about worship. Prior to that, she asks how we should worship. Jesus responds, and you've heard this before, but I want you to think about it in the perspective that we're referring to right now. It says, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father." And he talks about 3 different types of worshipers here. 3 different types of people who are trying to serve God. All 3 of these types are people who are looking to serve God, but their approach, their mindset is very different. He says in verse 22, he says, "You worship what you do not know." Right? Number 1. Number 2, we worship. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. That's number 2. The third one, the hour is coming and now is when true worshipers will worship the Father. So 3 different types of people who are attempting to serve God. Those who worship ignorantly. They're worshiping a God, although they may not have all the full understanding, background, doctrine, training, teaching, background, lineage, whatever the case may be. They don't come from that background. Versus number 2, we know what we worship, for salvation of the Jews. The Jews are the ones that have all the background. They have all the training. They have all the experience. They have been in the church. When you think about this in modern days, you think about the first ones as people who come from the world. They don't know. There's a lot of people come from the world. They don't know churchese. They don't know the right words to say. They don't know the right way to act. They come in church, and if they really are just passionate to God, they may move a certain way, they may act a certain way, they may smell a certain way. They don't know, right? They just doing what they do, but they're worshiping God. They're worshiping him without knowing the structure or the traditions of church. The second group is the group that knows those traditions and operates within those traditions and oftentimes operates within those guidelines, meaning that, we know we stand up at a certain time, we sit down at a certain time, we come at a certain time, we dress a certain way, we clap a certain way, we respond a certain way to certain songs, etc., so forth. We know when we take the offering, we know blah blah blah. They know, they're familiar, they're churched, and so they worship in a way that aligns with what they have known of God. And then it says the third group are the true worshipers. It says these true worshipers are those who worship the Father in spirit and in truth. This group of worshipers are the worshipers that are beyond simply the facts or beyond, I grew up in church and I knew it that way. This group are the Davidic worshipers. These are the group that are passionate about God, that have a personal relationship with God. And so they're not just worshiping ignorantly because they think there's a God out there and that we should respect him. There's a lot of people, that don't go to church, they don't do this, don't do all those traditional things, but they believe there's a God. And so, yeah, we believe in him. But they don't really have a relationship with him. The second group, church folks, as most of us that are on tonight, we're folks that we came up this way, we've been taught this way, we've been in the church, and we know how church goes. But the third group is the group of passion. It's the group of relationship, which God truly has always been looking for. Talked about that on Sunday. That is the group that God is the most passionate about. Now, when we look at what John is showing in these chapters, you see the differences between these groups. This Samaritan group is the first group. They heard of God, they know of God, they believe there's a God, but they don't really know what that means in terms of what they're supposed to do. They don't really know him. They've just heard of him. We talked on Sunday about different types and levels of relationships. They know of him, they believe in him, they want to honor him, they just don't really have a relationship, they don't know what to do, right? What we're going into in chapter 5 are the second group, the ones who are from the church and know the church and have the word, have the Torah, and they know exactly by law what they're supposed to do and not do. And they worship God in reference to those commandments, but still not relationship. All right. I wanted you to see that because as you can see the difference in chapter 4 with the Samaritans, they see Christ, they hear from Christ, and they readily accept him. They don't ask for signs. They don't say, show us this and we'll believe. Look at what they say. It says, then they said to the woman, now we believe, not because of just what you said, for we have ourselves heard him and know that he is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world. These are the ones that are stretching beyond churchisms and beyond prove it to me. They have a much different mindset of acceptance. And it's an interesting thing because when you look at the difference again between the Samaritans and the Jews, the Samaritans were the outcasts. And you'll find this often to be the case, where the people who are not of the known accepted group, the people who are outside of church, when they hear about God, sometimes they will jump in faster and more intimately to God and the things of God than people who've been sitting up in churches all their lives. Because a lot of times we feel that sitting in the church is enough. And it forms your element of relationship to God. Not that it's close or intimate, but it's established. Yep, I am a church person. I go to church on Sundays. This is what we do, right? We don't say certain words. We don't curse. We don't do certain things, blah, blah, blah. We don't go certain places. It's a formality, but the formalities don't necessarily mean you are truly connected to God. And so in their case, they hear, they see, and they accept. But then you see the contrasts that come throughout the rest of this chapter and in the next chapter where Jesus is talking about, man, you guys, all you want is signs, right? Here in verse 48, unless you people see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe. Everything you're going to see. Look, if you want us to believe on you, show us a sign. Do a miracle. Do another trick, right? Prove yourself to us. It's not a heart thing. It's you got to lay out your case and enough and cause us to believe it. And we're not easy to fall for stuff. That's the mindset. And that's what carries on into the next chapter as well, is this same concept. Oh, sorry, I haven't been showing you the screen. Been talking, but hopefully you've gotten that. That was all from chapter 4. That is the concept under which we are now moving into. Out of Samaria, we're going now into Jerusalem and Judea, and that's where the staunch Jews are. All right, so let's jump into chapter 5, and now this time I'll actually show the screen. And so, John chapter 5, beginning at this, it says, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches, and in these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. I'm running through this fairly quickly because I know you know the story. Those of you that are church, right? You're in that middle group. You've heard the story, right? For an angel went down a certain time into the pool, stirred up the water. Whoever stepped in it first, after the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had. So first one in is the first one to get healed. First one in is there for you. So now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" Now that's the question Jesus asked him. He asked him, look, you want to be well? Right? The guy's been there 38 years. You would think it would be a yes, but sometimes we get so locked into our ailments that they just become a part of our identity. Now you got to watch that, because there are times, and many of us have gone through it, where your ailments, the things about you that aren't what they should be, not just physical, emotional, spiritual ailments. I've been emotionally hurt and scarred by people, and I've been this way so long that it's just become part of your identity. Perhaps it's made you a bitter person. You weren't always bitter, but now you are. Perhaps it made you a mistrusting person. It's impacted you because it's become part of you. And you can be sick so long that you ultimately stop looking to get better. Your sickness becomes part of your identity, again, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. And that's why when you look at this man's response, you would think it would be, you want to get well? And he'd be, yeah. But instead of him responding in terms of becoming better, he's justifying why he's the way he is. Look at what his response is. Jesus says, you want to be made well? The sick man answered him, sick man, emphasize, right? Sir, I have no man to put me in the pool when the water is stirred. I know how this works. I know what's supposed to happen. I know what the process is, but I don't have anybody to help me. But while I'm coming, another steps down before me. So instead of responding that, yes, I'm looking to be made well, he really just gives a justification as to why he's who he is. And who he is at this point is a lame man. He's probably even referred to as the lame man. Go down the street, go around the corner, and look for the lame man. What's his name? I don't even know his name, right? They didn't give his name, right? They call him the man who was lame for 38 years. He is known by his infirmity even more than his own personal identity. His infirmity has become his identity. Watch it. You have to be careful that you don't allow those things about you that are not what they're supposed to be. Remember, Jesus was about restoration, returning us back to the state that we were intended to be and that God made us in. If you were sick, you were healed. If you were emotionally broken down, he would restore your mindset. If you were demon possessed, if you were spiritually oppressed, he would set you free. It's always about restoring you back to whatever your natural and God-given condition would be. So you don't want to be locked into, I'm the lame man. I'm the frustrated person. I'm the bitter person. I'm the hurt person. I'm the plagued person by whatever, by the devil, by spirits, by depression. I'm the depression. You do not want to be characterized by your infirmity. Your first response ought to be, I'm ready. Even if it's been 38 years, never allow yourself to be identified purely by your infirmities. So his response is, well, it's not even, yeah, I would be. His response is simply, yeah, not going to happen because I don't have anybody to help me. So I'm here, I'm doing the best I can. Got any money for me? It's the resolve to this identity that he has to overcome. And so Jesus asked him this question. He responds to this, and Jesus just cuts to the chase. Says, "Look, man, rise up, take your bed, and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed, and walked. Had he realized what would he think he would have done if he had realized his healing source was standing right in front of him? But that's not even where his mind was. Jesus cut through all that. He restored him. And now, this is the story, but now comes the problem. Keep in mind in these chapters in particular, every time Jesus does something that should prove him as being something more than just a man, the controversy comes. Every good thing he does brings about resistance. Think about this. Every step he makes towards healing somebody, delivering somebody, to elevating somebody, restoring somebody, resistance, opposition comes in. The devil don't like when you do good. The devil doesn't like when you get victory. He doesn't like when you get set free. And he doesn't bother you as long as you're sitting on the side of your healing, lame, and accepting your lameness. He didn't have any problem as long as he's lying down there. Now later on we find this story, even the spiritual leaders come to not just Jesus, but they come to the lame man. What you doing? What's happened? You must be some kind of liar, some kind of fake, right? As long as he was laying on the side, injured, can't do anything, lame, nobody was bothering him. Let me put it this way. No devil was bothering him because he was already locked in. Good evening, Sister Kizzy. It's been a while. I haven't seen you on in a while. I've seen you after. But welcome. So now he's got this issue and the issue is he's been healed. The issue is he's been restored. The issue is he's no longer bound up by that thing that had him bound up for 38 years. You think everybody would be jumping, shouting, rejoicing, dancing in the spirit. But now the enemies come up. You need to understand that. Sometimes when you get your victory, there's going to be opposition to it. And so Jesus tells him, rise up. He's healed immediately. He goes on. And the day was the Sabbath. The Jews, therefore, said to him, who was cured, it is the Sabbath. It's not lawful for you to carry your bed. Jews said to him, who was cured? So to the man, it's not, you shouldn't be carrying your bed. He answered them, he who made me well said to me, take up your bed and walk. Look, if he made me well, I'm doing what he said. I'm taking up my bed and I'm walking into my healing. God has set him free. God has delivered him. And now what do they want to do? They want to bind him up in the law. They want to find something that says that what you're doing is wrong. There's so many cases where we try to restrict and constrict God. God can only work in this way. He can only work through these people. He can only work under these circumstances. He can only work in the church. Man, you ain't even a church. How's it going to work on there? He can only work through men, can't work through women, right? However, we try to restrict. The Holy Spirit only works in this kind of way. Only it impacts people certain ways, blah, blah, blah. God is a God to do what he want to do. Literally. I mean, you look at how God does things throughout the Bible. God is a God to do what he wants to do. Use who he wants to use whenever he wants to use it. We have to learn to perceive when God is moving and understand that God cannot be restricted by how we interpret his laws. This is the difference that we talked about at the beginning between the ones who were serving God with ignorance, those who were serving God because they had the law and they were restricting in that law, and those who were the Davidic worshipers, those with relationship and passion for God. Jesus sets this man free, and the only thing that the religious folks can do is find fault in it. They can't understand he's been set free. It goes on later. They try and accuse him of casting out devils by devils. Come on, what y'all thinking, right? What y'all thinking? What y'all think? Let's go on. Let's keep going as time keeps moving here. So Who asked? They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" But the one who was healed, did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn. I'll come back later. A multitude being in that place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you've been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come." So Jesus heals him, walks right off. Right? It's done. You good? Jesus just showed up, man. We ought to wish and pray for God to show up like this. Jesus just showed up, saw the man there, been sitting there 38 years. He says, "You want to be healed? Take up your bed, walk." And then just leaves. It's not waiting for him to jump and bow at his feet and holler and scream and all that stuff. It's like, it's done. Obviously, he saw something in this man that he felt deserved. And I don't only say the word deserved, but he was chosen to be healed. There was something about him that selected him to be healed. And then once he was healed, then Jesus said, "Okay, job done." Right? But he catches him again and he says, and he warns him, he says, "Go and sin no more, lest the worst thing happen to you." Let's keep that one in mind as well. And so, where are we at? Okay, we're down here, right? Then he departed and told the man, it was Jesus who made him well. So then the man departed and told the Jews it was Jesus. Now he knows it's Jesus. He tells them it's Jesus. He's going into another section here, right? And this section, every time you see a victory, you see a challenge, an opposition. Verse 16, "For this reason the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, 'My Father has been working until now, and I have been working,'" right? So God's work and I work, right? God heals, I heal. "Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God." So the whole concept, even of calling himself the Son of God, was to make an assumption that as the Son, he came forth from God, which means he's on a godly level. Right? So to call himself the Son of God, the offspring of God, means that he's on a level that is in the same range as God versus being a man. They call that blasphemy. We call that the truth, right? That's what we proclaim as the gospel, is that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He is the offspring. He comes forth from God. John expressed that very clearly in his first chapter, where he talked about the Word, and the Word became flesh. The thing is, every time Jesus tells the truth about that situation, they don't believe. And because they don't believe, then they call him a blasphemer, right? It's a matter of them, again, that middle group in the law. We know how things are supposed to work. We know the church is supposed to be like this. Something changes. Nope, nope, nope. Because this is where it's supposed to be. They know the law, but they don't understand the law. And so now we go on. "Therefore the Jews sought to kill him all the more, because not only broke the Sabbath, but he's making himself equal with God. Then Jesus answered and said to them, 'Most assuredly I say unto you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. For whatever he does, the Son also does in like manner. For the Father loves the Son, and shows him all things that he himself does, and he will show him greater works than these, that you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives life to them, even so the Son gives life to whom he will." Now, John gives us what we'll call, in modern terms, these Easter eggs throughout his book. He's giving us things that Jesus is saying that actually refer to things like his death, burial, and resurrection. The references that come out in what he describes as Jesus stating. And we have confirmation from some of the other books as well, that Jesus did prophesy in advance to these things happening, especially to his inner circle, that these things were going to happen. But they're really pronounced, they really come out in the book of John as he expresses these different things. So Jesus here is telling him, as the Father raises the dead and gives life to them, because that don't happen in their time frame, right? They don't know nothing about God raising the dead and giving life to them. The only reference they would have had to that in the law was Ezekiel, "Can these dry bones live?" But that's not a practical thing. But what Jesus is talking about is resurrection, right? Even so, the Son gives life to whom he will. So as the Father is going to bring resurrection and life to people, the Son has that same thing, because he said that the Father does these things and gives them his Son the ability to do them as well. For the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son. We saw in the previous chapters, chapter 3 and 4 in particular, where John was writing and describing to us. Remember the story of Nicodemus a couple weeks ago. And Nicodemus was all confused over the principles that Jesus was telling him about being baptized, being reborn, being born of water and born of spirit. He doesn't understand. And he says, you don't teach like anybody else. And Jesus is going to share with us throughout here that he's able to share things in a whole different level because he's been there. He's seen it. Think about yourself. You think about the history books that we see written today, and they give you one perspective of a certain historical event. But if you were actually there, you see it in a much different perspective. We see and hear stories of what happened in the 1930s, right? In the 1940s, even all the way up through John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. We hear stories about it. But for those who were there, the view, the perspective is very different. You talk to people who lived through the Depression, who lived through World War II. Not many left anymore. But when you had the opportunity to talk to those people, what it was like, for example, to be at war, it's a very different perspective than those of us who have never experienced that. Jesus teaches from a perspective of knowledge and knowing. He's not just telling about, and this is the problem. Those who had the law are trying to get the full picture, understand the full picture from what is a fragment of reality and truth in the law. Jesus' understanding is much broader. And so when he goes try and explain to them certain things, it does not compute because it does not fit into their interpretation and understanding of the law. And so as a result of that, they're struggling. But Jesus is at a whole nother level here as he teaches them, right? He says that for the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son, that all should honor the Son just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Now, these things, from Jesus' perspective, make perfect sense because he knows from whence he came. From their perspective, it makes no sense whatsoever, and how dare you say these things? But Jesus is speaking the truth, and John is writing here the truth that ultimately is proven in the end. But as Jesus is saying these things to them, they are not buying it. They're not into it at all. Keep continuing on here, verse 24. He says, most assuredly, I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life. Now, if you read these things now from our perspective of who Jesus is, you not only accept these things, but you learn truly what God has done for us. And so it's written for those of us who serve Christ and believe in Christ to get an even fuller understanding of who and what Jesus is, because John is all about expressing and helping us understand who Jesus truly is. Not just a man, not just a prophet, not just someone who came on the scenes, but someone who was truly sent from God. He was of God and from God, and he has that perspective that he shares with us in being with us, right? It's most assuredly I say to you, the hour is coming and now is when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. This is resurrection. Made no sense to them at the time. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself, and has given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man. So God has given authority, he's delegated authority to his Son, Jesus Christ, to be able to raise the dead. The authority to be able to call men and women out of sin, the authority to be able to take people out from hell, is all given into the hands of Christ. It's delegated authority. Delegated authority given from the Father to the Son. I want you to understand today that God had an intent to give us delegated authority. Authority that comes from the Father to the Son. We are the sons and daughters of God. Talked about this a little bit on Sunday. Jesus was made a son. He was made from the Spirit, and he was then from the Spirit of God created to be the son or the offspring of God. We were made from the dust of the earth, but then filled with the Spirit. And also, hence, we were made, remember, in his image and his likeness, and then filled with the Spirit to also be the sons and daughters of God. Not saying that we are equal with God, but saying that he's caused us to be in a offspring relationship with him. That's why we're called sons and daughters. He looks at us as his offspring, as his sons and daughters. I know that's thick. I got to think about that a few times over. But God gave us delegated authority over earth when he made us. Be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion over the fish of the seas, over the fowls of the air, over the cattle. He delegated dominion to his son, Adam. And then he gave him a helpmate to be in line with him, in agreement with him, in maintaining that delegated authority over the earth. God gives delegated authority to his sons and daughters, which means he gives it to us as well. And he intends for us to have it. But before he can do that, he has to restore us, which is what Jesus Christ comes to do, to restore us so that we can then take our rightful place as children of God with delegated authority. That's a lot. I hope you got that. So he says, don't marvel. We already talked about verse 30. He says, I can of myself do nothing. Same thing with us. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I do not seek my own, but my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. The Bible tells us we are going to be judges one day. A lot of coincidence here, right? No. God intended for us to be the sons of God. Beloved, now we are the sons of God. It does not yet appear what we shall be. We are intended to be in that position of delegated authority from God, right? That's where he's restoring us back to. Let me keep going. If I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. There is another who bears witness of me, and I know that witness. Now, in this particular case, he talks, I'm going to jump through this quick to get into the next chapter, about 4 witnesses that witness of him. The first is John. You have sent John. That was John the Baptist, not John the writer here. But John the Baptist was the first one that bears witness of him. The second thing is the works that I do bear witness of him. The third is the Father himself that bears witness of him. And the fourth is the scriptures. So Jesus gives us 4 things that reference and make reference to him, bear witness of him. You can go back and read this. I want to make sure that I jump ahead to keep going. But these are all elements of John showing us and revealing to us that who and what he is. Now, I want to jump to chapter 5. Chapter 6, and get into this next part. In chapter 6, the first thing we see is the feeding of the 5,000. So let's jump right into the story. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Then a great multitude followed him because they saw his signs, which he performed on those who were diseased. Now we're back to people who are falling because of evidence. You had those in Samaria who openly believed. You had those in Judea, around Jerusalem, which is largely the scribes and the Pharisees, those leaders, spiritual leaders, and they didn't believe. Now you jump all the way up from Judea, past Samaria, into Galilee. I apologize, I intended to have a map to show you. But in Galilee, these are those that are seeking signs and had seen signs. And some of them believed because they had saw signs. In Judea, they were asking for signs, but really they didn't believe. And so that lack of faith held them back. Now in Galilee, there's also Nazareth. And we'll come back across that in a moment. But here now as he goes into Galilee, the Sea of Tiberias, right? Then a great multitude followed him because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And while he was in Galilee last time. And Jesus went up to the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover feast of the Jews was near. And then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" but he said it to test him. In other words, Jesus is saying it to test Philip. He wants to see what he's going to say. But Jesus already knew himself what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. We don't have to worry about what 200 denarii is. You can, for 5,000 men, plus women and children, you can assume it was a lot, right? So one of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? It says, then Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place. Can you know this story? So the men sat down, numbers about 5,000, and Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down. Jesus gives the broken pieces of bread to the disciples. 12 disciples give those broken pieces of bread to the people who are sitting down. 5,000 men, plus women and children. Excuse me, my throat is drying out. And so after, here's the thing, right? If that ain't enough, right? You had 2 small fish, 5 barley loaves, a couple of fish. Jesus takes it, breaks it, prays for it, passes it to the disciples pass it to 5,000 plus people. And then after that, he tells them, okay, now go. And he says, so when they were filled, right? First of all, everybody's filled off of those 2 barley loaves and 2 small fish. And then has a nerve to say, gather up the fragments that remain. Okay, you had 5 barley loaves, 2 fish, small fish. Emphasize, it's 2 small fish, right? Jesus prays. He breaks it. He divides it up. He passes it out. They go out. All these people are filled, and he says, go gather back the fragments. So they gather the fragments, they gather them up, and filled 12 baskets with fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. So after feeding 5,000, they came back with 12 baskets full of fragments. Now that's some multiplication happening there. That's some serious action that's taking place in terms of God spreading something. You can talk about God can take little and do great. We were praying about that, I believe, last night. How God can take little and do great. Monday. Was it Monday? Must have been Monday night. Man, God can take the smallest we have and do great and amazing things with it. I want you to understand that about yourself. It doesn't matter if you're great or you're big or you're well known or you're renowned or you're the smartest, or you're the brightest, whatever. You're the most talented. God can take the smallest and do great, great things. That means you and me. I'm not so great. You're probably not so great either. But God can use us. And that's a powerful thing for us to understand and to trust ourselves in God's hands to do that. So then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. But again, I want you to gather that this Galilean group is a group that believes because of signs. Remember at the end of chapter 4, when we were looking at past the Samaritans, it was actually somebody from Galilee with the story about the man that had his son was dying, and he asked God, heal my son. And Jesus says, man, y'all don't believe anything unless you see a sign, right? There's a Galilean mindset that says, you show us a sign, we'll do it. And oftentimes, there's a certain type of people that need you to do for them before they believe you. Jesus is willing to do it, but he's really looking for those that can believe even without seeing the signs. This is another one of those things that gets echoed throughout the book of John, because it ends, remember, with Thomas, doubting Thomas, saying, unless I see the nail prints in his hands and his feet, place my fingers in his side, I will not believe. I need a sign. So there's a certain type of follower that only follows because of what they see evidenced. Versus the Samaritans, they came to Jesus, they heard Jesus, they received Jesus. They didn't ask for any signs from him. It's different types of believers out there. Let's keep going. Verse 15, therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, they were like, look, you're going to be king, like it or not. But that's not what he came for. So he departed, went to the mountains by himself. Now when the evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, went over the sea toward Capernaum. I wish I had the map. When you see the Sea of Galilee here, let me see if I can find you a very quick map. I apologize, but let me just see if I can find one really quick. Let's see. Let me just a second, because I want you to be able to see this, if we at all can. I'm desperately trying to find something just quick. Hopefully I can do this. I'm not going to find, unfortunately, the one that I had earlier, but hopefully I can at least find something. Yes, look at that. God is good. All right, let me show you this real quick. So we're doing this off the cuff, but some of us are visual learners, and I think it helps. So in this particular case, there's a map, and this is what all of Israel looked like back in those days, right? You remember some of this down on the very bottom is Egypt. It came up out of Egypt. You can't see the Red Sea; it's way at the bottom, right? But as you come through this area, this is the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, and here is the Sea of Galilee. And I was mentioning to you, down here is Judea, where you see Jerusalem and Bethlehem and all that, Jericho, and then Samaria, and then Galilee. So Judea down here, Samaria in between, Galilee is in the north next to the Sea of Galilee. So Jesus has been going back and forth between Galilee and Samaria and Judea. When he stopped in Samaria, it was because he was coming from Judea, and he stopped there at the well, right? Some of this hopefully will help you visualize some of this. And then from there, they went on into Galilee. Now we're in Galilee. I can blow this up for you. And this area of Tiberias and Capernaum are areas that you're going to see in this chapter, chapter 6. When you talk about Jesus crossing the Sea of Galilee and walking on the water, it was between these areas, Tiberias and Capernaum. While I have the map, let me show you a couple other things. Nazareth, where Jesus was raised, is here. You're going to see Cana, which is here. This is where the first miracle of the water of the wine turned to wine takes place in Cana. And then Jesus is now between Tiberias and Capernaum. And this is where the boat's going back and forth, and Jesus walks over the water. Okay? Try to give you some things that help visualize this a little bit, what's happening here. So let's go back now to the word. Excuse me. Okay, so now as we look at this, therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come, he leaves. When the evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, went over the sea toward Capernaum. They were in Tiberias, and they went across the sea to Capernaum. And it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. So then the sea arose because a great wind was blowing. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. It's an interesting story. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the story because you know it, but understand some of the things that are happening here. So we see back again at the map that they were coming from Tiberias, and they were on their way to Capernaum. Now, obviously, it was quicker for them to take the boat route than to have to walk around. So they would do this quick jump across, not across the full length or the full length here, but they want to take this jump across here. And as they're going out, a storm picks up. And the Bible tells us that they're wrestling with the storm. They're continuing on, but they're stuck, and they probably can't see where they are. I believe one of the versions tells us they can't even see the land anymore. They don't know where they are. They're just trapped out there. They're thinking they're going to die. Jesus, who was in Tiberias, who was in the mountains when they left, now comes walking on the water in the midst of the storm towards them. And they see him coming in closer and closer. He gets in, there's a fuller length story in the other Gospels. But by the time he comes in, they realize they're actually already just outside of Capernaum. The storm calms down. Jesus gets in the boat. The storm calms down, and they realize they're there. So Jesus has walked all the way across the water to meet them here, and they're already at Capernaum, 4 or 5, however many miles it is to get there. Now, the rest of the story, let's go back to the story on this. It tells us, oh, I missed one point. I'll have to come back to it. But let's get through this. They get through there, and then on the following day, when the people who were standing on the other side of the sea saw that there was no other boat there except that one. So these are people in Tiberias where they left. They see, wait a minute, Jesus' boat is gone, the boat of the disciples. This is actually at Capernaum now. And they say, the only boat that's here, remember there's a storm, probably put the boats away. The only thing that's here, the only boat that's here is the boat that the disciples took. But Jesus, they knew, didn't leave with them. But now they find Jesus there. So they're scratching their head trying to figure out, wait a minute, how'd you get here? Rabbi, when did you come here? Because they're in Capernaum now. The disciples are there. The only boat that's there is the boat that they came in, but Jesus showed up. Right? So when people saw that Jesus was not where he was in Tiberias, right, nor his disciples, they got in the boats and they came over to Capernaum looking for him, right, and trying to figure out how he got there. Jesus answered them and said, most assuredly I say unto you, you seek me not because, again, you saw the signs, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. So these folks are following for a whole nother level. You're giving us stuff, so we following you. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but the food which endures. In other words, you're so worried about getting, the natural stuff, and you're following me because you're getting natural stuff out of it. Listen, I can tell you this is true, especially amongst people who have little, right? Their focus in following even the church is what the church is going to give them. Now, I'm not saying, and Jesus is not saying, you shouldn't give because he gave. But a lot of times the mindset is more about what I'm getting to sustain me in this natural than it is about what I'm getting in the spirit. This, by the way, is a concern we have to have in the church today, because many of our churches are so lined up to, if you serve God or you worship God, he's going to bless you with this, he's going to pay that bill, he's going to take care of that. And Jesus said, look, you shouldn't be so worried about those sustained stuff, those natural things. You should be worried about what's going to fill your spirit. And so he's encouraging them to understanding that he has way more for them than just that. He starts talking about, in the balance of this, the spiritual aspect of what he has to give. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him. So now the rest of this continues on, and now he starts really passing to them this concept of spiritual bread and spiritual water. As we jump down here, look, Jesus said, this is the work of God, that you believe in whom he sent. Therefore, they said to him, what sign will you perform then? These folks, look, you got to do something for us before we're going to believe you. You're not going to feed us? Then what sign are you going to give us? You got to give something, Jesus. Come on now. We need something from you before we believe on you. So their faith in him is conditional to what he's going to do for them. The relationship is conditional to what they're going to get from him. This is not a true relationship. This is not an intimate relationship. Intimate relationships are mutual. I give and I receive. We have to be conscious of the type of relationship we're trying to set up with God. Do you want God to be your Santa Claus? Or do you want God to be your lover? Do you want God to be your father, someone who cares about you unconditionally, that will love you even when you're making mistakes? Or do you just want him to be one that supplies for you stuff whenever you need stuff? Because that's the mentality that has us only coming to church when we're in trouble. It has us only praying when we got a problem. As every time we need something, we go to God. But we don't stay there. We don't linger there. We don't have a passion to be there. We don't enjoy the presence of God. We just go there as an alternative to getting what we need. You have to be very careful. I understand, especially from working overseas, that when people are hungry, when people are desperate, they are looking for things to address their immediate needs. But Jesus is trying to help them to understand, look, I know you got needs, right? I'll give you food, I'll give you bread. But that should not be the reason why you're following me. You can follow Christ for stuff and still not believe that he's Christ. And so he's challenging them. And because of that, he pushes them in challenging them. Let's jump down here. He says, and then Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. Now remember, in the Samaritan example, he was the living water. You come to me and never thirst. Now I'm the bread of life. You'll never hunger. Because what Jesus has to offer them is not for the moment, it is eternal. It will fill and resolve and settle you not only for now, but throughout. Also, remember we talked about Easter eggs. This concept of bread and thirst are the concepts that you also see later on in communion. And Jesus referred and referenced those things as being himself. Take, eat, this is my body. This is my blood. You'll see just a second here as we continue on with this, that Jesus starts putting that to them now. And it's so early, they don't conceive it. They don't understand it. Look at what he says to them. He says, but I said to you that you have seen me and yet do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. There's some echoing terms he gives you. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that all of he has given me, I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day. Again, this is about resurrection, eternal. Jesus is speaking and referencing things which are eternal and spiritual, but they don't understand it. We have the benefit and the blessing of having seen this post all of this time. Can you imagine if we're in the middle of that, you've never heard anything like this, and Jesus talking all this stuff, you can understand why they got confused. We have the benefit of seeing this beyond the time and seeing the more holistic aspect of what is being shared here. So he says, and this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, eternal. And I will raise him up in the last day. He's talking about resurrection. Now, look at this last section. The Jews complained about him because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. And they said, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? Remember those stories that the Bible gives us elsewhere about them being in Nazareth and not believing this is Joseph's son. Who do you think he is, right? How is it then that he says, I've come down from heaven? They're only looking at the natural. They're totally confused. Jesus, now he takes them even deeper. He says, don't murmur among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. So if you really aren't drawn by God to me, you're not going to understand. So a lot of people ask why Jesus spoke in parables. Jesus spoke in parables because it was only to be deciphered and understood by the true followers. And so as he shares these things, a whole bunch of folks that really don't believe anyway don't get it and don't try and go any further. But the ones who have the hearts of the Samaritans like this will listen to this, and they'll be more ready to receive. The true followers hear him, see him. They know there's something different about him. They follow. You'll see this in just a second again. So he takes them through all this, right? He says, it's written the prophets, and they shall all be taught by God. Therefore, everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not anyone has seen the Father except he who is from God. He has seen the Father. He's talking about himself. Not that anyone has seen the Father except he who comes from God. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who believes in me has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate manna in the wilderness and are dead because it wasn't permanent. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. Jesus is referencing himself. John is using Jesus' words to help explain who he is. I am the living bread, which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh. See? Foreshadowing. My flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. Now they're really getting confused. He's going to give us his flesh. What is he talking about? Some of the sacrifice on the cross. Jews therefore quarreled amongst themselves, saying, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, unless you eat of my flesh. He's just pushing them even more. He's pushing them even harder. Jesus is not simply trying to get 100% acceptance. He's trying to get those who will truly believe. He's separating the believers from those who just want signs, those who just want the miracles from him. Do you truly believe? And so he's pressing them in what he's saying and doing here. Let me ask you this question as you read this. Do you truly believe? He says, my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. And he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. As the living Father has sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread which came down from heaven. Not as your fathers ate the manna and are dead. He who eats this bread will live forever. I want to get down to this last section on this, where he says, therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, disciples, those that were following him, said, this is a hard saying, who can understand it? And when Jesus knew it himself that his disciples complained about this, he said to them, does this offend you? What then if you should see the Son of Man ascend where he was before? Another cookie, another foreshadowing of them seeing him going back to Christ, right? It is the Spirit who gives life, and the flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit, they are life. They need to understand he's speaking to them spiritually. But there's some of you who do not believe, for Jesus knew from the beginning. Gotta get this point in. Who they were who did not believe and who would betray him. You've heard me say many times that Jesus knew so much, especially when we talk about Easter and that time of the year. Jesus knew so much. We don't really know exactly how much he truly knew before these things were happening. Talks about Judas, who was with them, who he knew well before the garden, that he was going to betray him, well before the Passover service. He was going, and if he understood and knew that, how would he allow him to stay so close to him for so long, knowing the time is coming, you're going to be the one, you're going to betray me, you're going to turn on me. How many of us would allow our enemies to stay that close to us and trust that God knows what he's doing? Man, we'd be striking them down. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So for that time, from that time, many of the disciples went back. Disciples, the followers, the believers, not believers, they walked with him no more. Then Jesus came to the 12. This is powerful. Do you also want to go away? But Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. So I may not understand it all, but the one thing I know is that you are the one. Your words speak to my heart. Your words have changed my life. Your words guide me. Your words open the doors and opportunities to things I would have never experienced on myself. I may not understand everything right now, but I believe. And here's the difference between what we saw in the previous chapters and now. Jesus has caused those who were just following and those who were just trying to get from him to walk away. He has sifted wheat from tares. And the ones that are left, even though they may not have full understanding, they believe him enough to stand with him all the way to the end. So you can finish this. It does say here again, did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is a devil? He knew so far in advance who Judas was. He knew when he chose him, because he just said he chose him, right? And one of you is the devil. He knew when he was choosing him, you're going to be the betrayer. Wow, 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 wow. I want to show you one last thing and then I'll let you go. Let's go back, because I missed one thing back when we were talking about Jesus and Jesus feeding the 5,000. Now Jesus feeds the 5,000 here, right? And we talked about how he starts with 2 small fish, 5 loaves of bread. He breaks it. He gives it to his disciples, who give it to the people. He calls for the remnants of it, and it comes back way more than it started. I want you to gather from this, as the last thought of the night, that this is a representation of sowing and reaping. This is a representation of giving into the hands of God. We have to learn how to think beyond the natural in terms of giving. not just in the church, but in giving of ourselves as a whole. Because the concept of sowing and reaping means that you get back more than what you actually put out. You have to take a certain amount of what you have. And here's the key thing. I want you to get this. It's got to come from you. This is why David said, I can't make a sacrifice to God that costs me nothing. You have to be willing to give something that you have and know you don't have anything unless God gives it to you. Once God gives it to you and now it's in your ownership, now you have to be willing to take from what you have. Lord, I don't got enough. I don't got much. But you have to take from what you have and give it away. It's the sowing process. And it's that sowing that enables you to bring back a return that's even greater than what you started with. Now, that's not mathematical. It doesn't make mathematical sense. It's not logical. But it is a principle. And it's a real principle. Think about it. If you thought mathematically, I was talking to a brother friend of mine today about farming. And we're talking about all the issues and challenges of farming. But the concept of farming is I take these small seeds, which I have, which I could use for other things, but I take them and I plant those seeds. And my expectation is that what I'm going to get back is more than what I started with. It doesn't make logical sense, right? I start with 3 seeds, I should get 3 plants, right? But you actually multiply through the concept of sowing and reaping. And so what you see here in Jesus doing in this passage of feeding the 5,000 is an example of 2 small fishes and 5 loaves of bread that were sown. And when it was done, the return of it not only resolved the immediate issue, which was far greater than it should have resolved, but it actually brought back an increase greater than what was started. This is the story of the 3 servants that have received the talents. And also, I want to just show you this last scripture in the book of Luke, chapter 6. This is the example of what this scripture is. We quote this scripture, and I want to make sure you get it. This actually comes from the Sermon on the Mount. But in verse 38, it says, "Give, and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, it will be put into your bosom." What you get back, the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. But you'll get back multiplication of what you gave. This is the concept of sowing and reaping. And especially those of us who don't have much. This is the hardest when it's either when you feel like you're in the tightest situation because I don't have much, or because I know I need everything I got to pay my bills, to do what I got to do, and my budget is tight. This is when this becomes the most challenging to us. But you need to understand the greatest ways to get breakthrough is to learn how to give or sow with the anticipation of reaping a return. This is the whole concept of investment. Investors sow a certain amount into the market, into whatever, and they anticipate and they're pursuing a return greater than what they sowed. It's not mathematical in terms of plus minus. It is mathematical in terms of multiplication. And so you have to understand that what I'm doing is not taking and giving. It's pouring out and expecting it to multiply. All right? So I just wanted to make that last tie because I think it's powerful to us to understand. Jesus gives us the example right there of what it means to sow and to reap.